Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of Let's Fix This. Here we're going to show you how to replace the compressor on a Subzero refrigerator. I've already taken the grill off previous to this, so there's some screws that are already out. But basically you just got to tip the grill forward, remove the two spring clamps, and the grill comes off. There are a couple screws that go up underneath it inside the door that I'll show you when I put the grill back on. Then you'll need to take the cover plate off. There's two screws I'd already removed before I started filming, so once again I'll show you those at the end. I use vice grip pliers to evacuate the system. The compressor's on and running. Just clamp onto the left filter dryer and let that evacuate. While the system evacuates, I like to clean the joints on the compressor and go ahead and braze an access valve onto it. So after the joints are sanded, go ahead and remove the rubber stoppers or plugs. Got my 1/4 inch access valve. Go ahead and sand that as well. I like to get the copper nice and clean, that way the solder sticks to it a lot easier. I've already taken the access valve out of that, or sorry, the what was that thing called? I can't even remember. I'll think of it in a second. Schrader valve. There you go. Taking the schrader valve out already. I use a turbo torch or a Gauss torch. I switched to this a couple months ago. I do have a video on the Gauss torch, the live demo. I did speed things up because you don't need to sit there and watch me weld. Once I've got that access valve attached, go ahead and put the schrader valve back in. I like to cool the joints off as well. That's what the towel was doing. Now the system's evacuated, go ahead and take off the pliers. I've shut the refrigerator off at this point, and we're going to remove the old filter dryer. I personally like to cut everything out. I know some people use, they like to sweat the joints. I just cut it and redo the joint, redo the copper. I cut it right there at the base of the filter dryer, the cap tube, as well as the inlet line. Once that's done, we're going to remove the start relay device from the compressor. Remove the bolts, the mounting bolts to hold the compressor. I use a DeWalt 90 tool that attaches to my drill, and it makes this super easy. Well, in theory. It still gets pretty tight when you're going into the back ones, but this tool is attached to my drill on the other end, and like I say, it's pretty slick. If you don't have one, I highly recommend picking it up. It's flexible, able to get back and bend around corners. Go ahead and speed this up because you don't need to see me taking the back bolts out in real time. Just move the heat exchanger up out of the way so I can get back to that final compressor bolt. I use the Makita Impact. I love that drill. It's nice and compact, 18 volt. That's been my favorite drill. Okay, once your mounting bolts are off, then we're going to lift the compressor up and out. I'm going to speed this up because it is a little bit of a process. There are a couple brass stems that the compressor sits on that you got to get those out of the way. You kind of wedge the front, the back, move the heat exchanger out. It takes a little bit of wiggling here and there, but it comes out. Now once we've got it out far enough to see the discharge in the suction line, then we need to go ahead and remove those. Like I say, some people will sweat them. I just like to cut and start over. For me, it's a lot easier. Go ahead and speed this up just a tiny bit because it's a little bit of wiggling back and forth. Okay, those are off, and I apologize. I thought I had video of me cleaning those joints, but I didn't video it, but you can see I've cut with my tubing cutter and I've sanded the discharge and the suction line already. Like I say, I apologize I didn't have that on video, but that's a simple step. Go ahead and set the compressor back in place. I'm going to put in the discharge and suction lines. Make sure you get them in there as far as you can get them. It'll make it so that your lines don't get plugged as easily when you are soldering those back together. Nice thing about copper tubing is it is very bendable, so don't worry about breaking anything. Bend it a bit to make it line up. I'm going to add the flux to the joints, and we'll bring the Gauss torch back up. I'm going to go ahead and speed this up. You'll like I say, I'll attach a link at the end of this if you want to watch the actual live version of this. The Gauss torch does take a little bit longer to do the welds, but it does a really nice job with them. I'm a big fan of it. I can take all of my Silt System tools in one backpack into a house and put it on my back, so I generally can take everything in one trip. And it's an auto light. Don't have to use a striker anymore. It's built into the actual tip, so I really liked it. Makes nice, good, smooth, even welds. And yes, I know I use a lot of solder, but I like it that way. Go ahead and cool the joints down. Take the compressor. Gonna slide the heat exchanger up and over a tiny bit to make room for that compressor to slide back in. You want to watch the two lines, the discharge and the suction line that you just put on as you're pushing it back. Make sure you're not kinking or bending anything, but it should go back in pretty easy. Then we'll put the compressor mounting bolts back on. Some of these, when I've replaced that discharge and the suction line, they run in front between the two compressors, and I'll cut the line in front and pull the whole compressor out and then sweat the line off the compressor. But this one, the lines ran behind the compressor, so it's just easier to pull it out a bit and do the welding behind it there. Go ahead and put the bolts back on. Now we've got the filter dryer we're going to get ready. Go ahead and sand the joints really good. Once those are done, we're going to remove the schrader valve. Might hear my kids' music in the background, a little bit of Carrie Underwood. A little trick I like to use, I just use my crimpers and pop the bottom of that filter dryer right off where the cap tube goes. And I use my tubing cutters to remove the other side of the filter dryer. If we're lucky, we might hear my kids singing. Or unlucky. Okay, now we're ready to go. Looks like I need to still open up the cap tube. I use my wire cutters and put it on the second to smallest, give it a nice little crimp, and that scores it, and then I just bend it back and forth and it pops right off, breaks right off. That usually leaves a nice open hole on that cap tube. Tubing cutters to cut the other end. Okay, sand the joints really good. Better sanded joint, it means a better weld from what I've experienced. Go ahead and insert the cap tube into the base of the filter dryer. I usually stick it in about a 1/2 inch and then bend it so I can see how far it went in. And add our flux and solder. Speed it up a bit. And once again, I like to cool down all of my joints so that I don't burn my hands when I'm up in there working. Inspect them really good, make sure that there's no openings or gaps. Filter dryer, bend it back in place. And we're going to take the old start relay, get rid of it, and we're going to put the wires on the new start relay. Start relays have a L and an N. L is line, and the line wire is usually the colored wire. In this case, it's purple. Neutral is white. Plug the wires into the start relay, and we'll put the start relay on the compressor. Okay, once that's done, we're going to go ahead and hook up our low side gauge, the blue one, to the compressor, and then we're going to kick the refrigerator, turn the power onto the refrigerator. You can see we're in a 10-inch vacuum. Let it run for a bit, and we're in a 25-inch vacuum. Got my scale, refrigerant all hooked up. There's a lot of different ways to sweep a system. This is the way I do it. I hook a refrigerant bag up to the high side. Once I'm in a vacuum, I add refrigerant to the system, and then I go down to the bag and I pinch it off where the refrigerant's coming in. This is kind of the quick, easiest way. You do waste a little more refrigerant into the bag going this route. But you'll pinch it off. That allows refrigerant to cycle through the system and clean it out a bit. Then you remove your thumb and it shoots the refrigerant into the bag. I do that a couple times. Once that's done and I let the system get back into a vacuum, take the high side gauge off and put your schrader valve back into the filter dryer. And now we are in a 27-inch vacuum. System is swept. And we check, freezer gets 9 ounces of refrigerant. Going to go to the gauge or our scale, reset it to 0. And we're going to add 9 ounces of refrigerant. Go ahead and kick it on. And my battery on my computer's low. I better go plug it in. Go ahead and fill this up to, we're at 8.25 now. 8.5. Once it hits 8.75, I get ready to shut the refrigerant off. Now we'll watch our pressures, make sure it doesn't drop too much. I always like to check my welds with a little bit of green goop leak detector to see if any of my welds are going to leak through. Welds look good, pressures look good. Go ahead and remove the low side. Cap off the process valve. We're going to put the compressor cover back on. And there's the 2 screws that I had already taken out before I started filming that hold that cover in place. Then we got the grill we're going to go ahead and throw back on. I'm going to set it up, tilt it forward, and I wasn't able to film doing it, but you saw me taking the springs off, put the springs back on, and then here's the screw that goes up and attaches the grill to the refrigerator. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Let's Fix This. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks.